Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Alexis and today I'm going to be sharing my romance review about Twisted Love by Ana Huang. Now this book did come out, I want to say around April of 2021, but I admit I was hesitant to pick it up because I've heard it's giving off mafia vibes, and after reading the book I definitely agree, or at least what I imagine mafia would be in a romance, because I have been hesitant to dive into that subgenre. Not that I wouldn't, I'm just not currently intrigued enough to dive into that. But I won't say I wouldn't read into it, because there are some on my TBR list that could be read in the future, but in the near future, not by a long shot. I'm not ready. I feel as if they might be too dark for me, but this was mildly simmering. I would compare this to perhaps Safe Haven, which is inspired by a book of the same name. I did not read that book, but I would feel like the same level of suspense from that is in here. The plot, not really similar at all ish. I mean, more so, this was plot wise not related to Safe Haven, but the suspense filled romance, I feel like it relates to this. Now, this is between Ava Chen and Alex Volkov, I believe is how you pronounce it. He's of Ukrainian background, and Ava Chen is of Chinese American background. Now, with that being said, this story doesn't so much talk about their cultural differences. It's more so about their trauma and how they overcome it together and apart, which is an element I highly appreciated, because when it comes to a romance, I feel as if so often people think it's only going to be about the sexual tension or the chemistry between the characters. And of course, there's a good amount of that in this book. Throughout the story, you see their simmering relationships. From the moment we as readers are introduced to Alex, there is this moment in the rain when he's picking up Ava from a known location because she is stranded, right? He uh, sees something that makes Ava embarrassed, and it's just, he shows a form of protectiveness that was not so much subtle, but I liked it. And this is supposed to be, over the course of maybe, I want to say, a year, 2 years into their relation, or involving from acquaintances to somewhat friends to lovers. And initially, the reason they ended up being around each other more was because Ava's older brother Josh was going away for a year, and he asks Alex to look after Ava while he's away. Because not only is he a protective older brother, but because of her previous trauma in their childhood, experiences happen, and she has a deep rooted phobia and night terrors because of said trauma. So he wants someone to be around to protect her, someone to lean on, and just in case she needed somebody. Of course, she has her friends, but he also, Josh, and by is who I mean, he wanted someone to be there if he couldn't, a stand in, if you will. Alex at first is reluctant, but ends up consenting to this obligation. And he always had signs of being attracted to Ava, but he did say she wasn't at first his type, which personally I feel like that's a backhanded compliment. When you say, "Oh, you're not my type, but I'll make an exception for you." I don't know. That's a little standoffish for me. So I will admit, because of his familiar characteristics, perhaps in the first quarter of the book, on top of the unrealistic, fictitious backgrounds of the other girls for this group of friends. Because it was that unrealistic, I kind of took away a star, and I was concerned about that introduction and how it would set up the other books. But then as the story progressed, I can already understand, who the next book, or who the next book will revolve around, and as well for the third book. Uh, the last book had yet to be determined, but all in all, this book was filled with suspense that I wasn't expecting to be intrigued by. If anything, I was intrigued throughout the book, but more often it was because of suspense and not because of something romantic that happened, although their chemistry was simmering throughout. That's the best way I can describe this. Now, the trauma that I'm alluding to, for content warning, um, I'm not going to say who experienced what, but it there is mention of suicide, witnessing murders, of assault, stalker vibes, and violence. Now, for some people, those may be trigger warnings. For me, I have yet to read something that I could not read, or that I would purposely avoid, um, out of something that was triggering. I wouldn't say triggering, I just something, maybe a strong dislike, but I have yet to read things that trigger me. And as someone who isn't familiar with trigger warnings, those are what I would assume would be triggering. And I've looked at other lists describing what could potentially trigger a reader. But as someone who doesn't have any trigger warnings, I'm hoping that was enough of a warning for those of you who need it at all. But again, this book mainly shows two characters who, one being a grump, and you can assume, and you'd be correct, it's Alex. The sunshine is Ava, and it's so ridiculously obvious that Alex even calls her Sunshine as a nickname. And I'm not gonna lie, that kind of annoyed me when it was first brought up, because it was like, why something so obvious? But then as the story progressed and seeing how their relationship developed, I quickly rubbed off on it. It was okay. It was fine. If anything, the endearment was something I was always looking forward to reading, and seeing Alex, describe, you know, Ava as his sunshine, because she's the light of his life. And that's such a cheesy thing, and it's a corny nickname, but I live for the corny stuff, and I wasn't at any point scared or um, worried for the characters, because of course it's going to have a happily ever after, right? But I was always in suspense, or anticipating something happening, and I enjoyed having those moments. There were times when it would get somewhat heated, but overall, it was simmering throughout. By no means am I saying it's a slow burn, because it is not. And slow burns I am annoyed by, because I just want to get right into it, right into the relationship, see where things go, and just get started. All right, slow burns are just no. I don't care for them. But this was perfectly done for the later chapters for me. The second quarter for sure was full of suspense, but the first quarter of the book, that was where I was kind of iffy. But I guess it makes sense, because it's the beginning of a series and it's setting up the other books. Now, with that being said, I gave this book 4 stars because of my hesitancy in the beginning. And even then, I compared, okay, if I show you here, you can see these tabs here. those are the times when I am intrigued enough by a book that I feel like it's worth tabbing, something I might want to reread again, or moment where I felt there was this, aha moment, or, something that sparked interest for me or made me hurt. I didn't cry at all for this book, but I did feel heavy in my chest, whether it be for something that was so endearing or something that was related to betrayal or, you know, those moments of everything in between happiness and anger, right? And I would say definitely in the middle, a good chunk was intriguing. And then towards the end, it was, the pining and the groveling and being honest with each other. That was cute as well. But definitely in the um, good chunk of the middle was keeping me on my toes and, anticipating what could potentially happen. And yeah, definitely enjoyed this. I'm glad this was the first book I've ever read by Ana Huang. I look forward to reading her other 3 books in the series. Now, with that being said, the second book is about her friend Bridget, who is a princess, and that's already alluded to in the epilogue of this book. And it's not a surprise if you read this, but again, it's described that each book would be able to be read as a standalone, but personally, I like reading things in order. And Twisted Games, from what I've heard so far, is compared to Princess Diaries 2. That's a movie starring Chris Pine and Anne Hathaway. And I loved that movie. I enjoyed it more than the first one. And, if the second book is truly to be compared to that, I know I'm going to enjoy it. It's supposed to be a princess and bodyguard romance. And then the third book is going to be about Jules and her love interest, which is already hinted at in this book, Twisted Love. So I'm probably looking forward to the next 2. I'm not sure which one I'm going to like more because Enemies to Lovers, which will be Jules' story, is something that I enjoy when it's done properly. Um, Probably the most of the tropes that I've read so far, and that includes best friends to lovers, that includes older brother's best friend. Enemies to lovers tends to be something I enjoy most. And this one is mutual. It's mutual enemies to lovers. Like Jules and said person clearly have a dislike for each other for unknown reasons, and I'm assuming it's going to be relayed in her book, Twisted Hate. And the final book is going to be Twisted Lies, and that will be about Stella. She is the influencer of the group, meaning she is on social media and always taking pictures, but she's the quietest of the 4 girls and is more outgoing online, which makes sense because, online people are in a way empowered to be more expressive than they would in person with people who know them, because there's this level of anonymousness, anonymity. Excuse me, that's a word. Whew. But you know what I mean. The sense of her being anonymous to strangers online and uh, putting herself out there in a way that you may not be comfortable with in person, and that will be her story. But that has yet to be announced. The release date, same thing for the third book about Jules. Jules is described to be compared to Jessica Rabbit, and um, Jessica Rabbit is a character from the Warner Brothers cartoons. I personally vaguely remember her because I was like a late 90s baby. I hardly remember those cartoons. If anything, they were on VCR tapes. And if you don't know what VCRs are, yeah, I'm on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z. So it is what it is. But another thing I enjoyed about this book, and this is just a side note, but the book does mention a good amount of pop culture, and this doesn't particularly um, like it doesn't adhere to the plot per se, but Alex, the character of Alex, who is the leading man in Twisted Love, he is compared to Ian Somerhalder. And for those of you who don't know, Ian Somerhalder was in the Vampire Diaries series, which was on the CW, starting in 2009. And I vaguely remember because I was, I want to say that was fourth grade. I was in fourth grade when Vampire Diaries started, and I've always been Team Damon. He was the bad boy of the two brothers who were pining over the one girl, Elena. But again, Ian Somerhalder was my man crush for the longest time. Like Loki still is, despite our age gap. It's fine. But Alex is compared to him explicitly in the story to Ian Somerhalder, and as soon as that was said, I was like, ding, okay, I see it. I can see it. Bad boy meets the good girl, and he'll only be good for her. That's just, and what's funny? It's not that he's only good for her, but he'll be good with her. But if someone tries to touch her or harm her in any way, he's there. He is very protective, and if he can't be there, he'll get someone to be her bodyguard in his place until he can get there. So I think that is just something to continue to be intrigued by, and very enjoyable read. 4 stars. I do plan on picking up Twisted Games hopefully in the near future, but I do have other books I want to dive into, so maybe need to put a lock on my wallet for now. But all in all, I hope you enjoyed my romance review. I realize it's quite lengthy. It's just hard not to gush about books that you enjoy, and that is exactly what I try to do. So thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.